another Rock My Age podcast. I'm delighted today to have with me Clare Laurent. Clare has recently, with a colleague, created an app called Shrink that is looking to democratise therapy, which I think is a wonderful idea. So I'm really excited to talk to her. It's an app that, in a sense, puts therapy in your pocket, and it's built around three themes: relationships, decisions, and knowing yourself. And in a sense, Clare sort of describes it as a daily dose of therapy. So we're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about how it came about and benefits of it as well. Clare started life as a corporate lawyer. She was general counsel for AOL, amongst others, and she jumped ship from corporate life when she had a family at 38. And in 2008, she began a journey in psychotherapy, doing a master's in organisational psychology, specialising in women's careers, and a PhD in mentoring for women. So she brings a really great blend of expertise, experience in coaching, mentoring, and psychology, and the corporate world. So really excited to have this conversation. So welcome, Clare.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's really exciting.
So I'm very excited about your app. So tell us a little bit about it, how it came about. And I guess I'd be really interested in why these three themes particularly.
Yeah. So the themes, well, the app, to start first of all with how the app came about. So I've worked closely for a number of years with a professor and practicing psychotherapist who was actually my supervisor at Birkbeck when I was doing my PhD. And he has worked alongside his academic life. He's also worked as a psychotherapist for about 25 years, maybe even longer now, actually. We're sort of getting older. And he's been interested for a long time in how you can disrupt and innovate in the domain of psychotherapy. And psychotherapy has actually been subject to some really strict norms that have been in place really since Freud around what we call time, territory, and task. So if you think about the traditional idea of psychotherapy, you'll probably picture a room where there's a couch and it's a 50-minute session, and it's every week and sometimes every day, which is how it started with Freud. And those are the very specific sort of frames within which psychotherapy takes place. And Andreas and I began to sort of talk about, well, why is that? And does that actually need to remain in place? And Andreas has, as I say, a kind of history of innovating, and he really started with when he began working with equine therapy, which I know you know a lot about. And the idea, obviously, is to take therapy outside of the clinic. And also what's interesting about equine psychotherapy is that you sort of remove the therapist from the relationship. So the therapist becomes a bystander to the relationship between the person who wants help and the horse. And what the therapist does is essentially observe the dynamics going on between the person and the horse, and then make certain interventions on that basis. And Andreas has been using that for a long time and has had, a huge amount of success in working with people with all sorts of mental distress and disorder and so on. And his idea then, which we spoke about, and obviously his interest in talking to me, was that I had worked for a long time in the internet industry before I sort of moved over to a more psychological focus in life. And we talked a lot about, well, what would Freud do now if he were embarking on his career? And, his idea, and the idea of many psychotherapists when they describe themselves, is they will talk about themselves as a blank screen. And that's very important in that it's a kind of unique relationship in which the person brings in all their baggage and their history of relationships and dynamics and thoughts and so on. And they sort of project them onto the therapist, who is this blank screen and who reflects stuff back and makes interventions and so on. But actually most of the work is done by the person themselves, coming in and using that process of the blank screen to process what's going on in their lives. And of course, when we think about a blank screen today, we kind of think about this is our modern blank screen. And so that's really where we started on thinking about how could we really bring psychotherapy into the modern age. And we think there's a real need for that for two reasons, which I think many of your viewers will know about, and you will know about as well, which is that we've reached a real crisis point, probably in the Western world particularly, and maybe even more broadly around, if you want to put it in economic terms, supply and demand. So there's been a huge process of people becoming much more aware of the importance of their psychological well-being as well as their physical health, being more curious and being more interested in working in that area. But at the same time, there's a real shortage of experts to provide that kind of face-to-face advice. And also that traditional format that we talked about can be really off-putting for a lot of people. They don't have the time or the money or the inclination to invest what you have to do in traditional psychotherapy. So those were really the things that we wanted to change. So that idea of time, territory, and task. And we wanted to bring that out of the therapeutic room and away from the horse, and do it in a way that's much more accessible to many, many more people. And so what we've essentially done is kind of trawled through a back catalogue of really tried and tested therapeutic techniques and digitized them. And we've taken our sort of top 3 and put them onto the app as it is at the moment. And obviously we've got much bigger plans for this. Our idea is about having a whole platform for mental well-being that people can access a whole range of services, including lots of group interaction, because we love this whole idea of group dynamics and people working together to help each other, rather than just one-on-one interventions with a therapist or using the screen. But for now, we've got this very what we would essentially call a beta product that has core exercises that relate to each of those ideas that you were talking about. And when we were thinking about the task, what do people come to therapy for, and why do people, even if they don't come to the therapy, what are their key concerns in their lives? And I think that you can probably boil those down to 3 core elements. So people worry a lot about the decisions that they have to make. They worry about the relationships that they have and patterns of relationship, and they worry about certain things in themselves that they don't really understand. So why is it that I always react in a certain way? Why do I have this troublesome desire to eat, for example, when I feel anxious? Or why do I always date the wrong person? Why am I always having pointless conversations with my mother? That kind of stuff is the stuff of everyday life that people fret about and worry about, and often but can't move beyond fretting and worrying to actually getting under the surface. And, we've observed that there's a whole industry already online that's kind of built up around this, which is about managing people's anxieties and symptoms. And I think that in itself has been a big step forward. And what I talk about with that is things like Calm and Headspace, and other apps which are all about meditation, and some of them are even around CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a kind of short-term way of managing stress and anxiety. So I think the digitization of those kind of techniques has been a big step forward as well. And a lot of them are based in yoga and meditation and so on, which is fantastic. But it remains very focused on symptom management rather than understanding why I have a panic attack or why I'm having problems getting to sleep. And Shrink is much more about giving people the opportunity to start to get to know themselves better. So yes, sure, do some breathing, but also understand why it is that I'm having this reaction. And that's really where we started from.
Do that, Claire. How do you, because Headspace and Calm and others are, there's, as you say, there's certain breathing techniques, mindful practices. But if you're going to do, I have been through some therapy myself. So when you go into that process, and obviously there's a lot of dialogue and conversations and time to process as well, which actually an app is very good at. But how do you go, I suppose there's 2 questions I've got in my mind. How do you go deep in those questions on an app? And also therapy can bring up a lot of issues, and if it goes quite deep and you're processing that, how do you manage the kind of support around that? So I was sort of interested in the type of questioning that you found can work, I suppose, on an app, because I expect a lot of people are thinking, well, how's that going to work?
And obviously for now we're right at the beginning of that journey, but I think you've expressed some ideas that we're working on now really, really well. But the basic idea for now, what will happen if you go into our little app, which is up and running, is that you will be asked certain questions that are based on how you assess somebody's levels of anxiety and depression and so on. So you'll have a certain number of questions that help us get to know you as a person. And on the basis of those questions, we will point you. So we will say, okay, we think this is probably the area that you need to focus on in the short term. So go and try this exercise and do it, several times, and then see what happens. So that's the journey for the time being. And each session incorporates a few key elements. So we always believe that it's really important to bring the person into their body and into the moment so that they can really reflect in the kind of here and now, which is what you do in the therapy room. So we do use some really simple breathing exercises so that people kind of slow it down, calm down, and come into their own space. And then on the back of that, we've got these specific exercises that are exercises that you would have, that you would undertake in a therapy process. And one that is really powerful that I can give you as an example is what's called the chair exercise, which is all about relationships. And it can even be about your relationship with yourself. So what you do with the chair is you put somebody that you need to speak to. So whether it's a business colleague or a partner or a parent, or even a part of yourself that you don't like very much. And some people actually even use it to talk about illness, or to talk about, so they will put the part of them that's ill or the illness itself, which they might regard as separate to themselves, onto the chair, and then they talk. And we invite you to press the record button on your phone and to just speak very freely. And then when you've had enough, when you've said your bit, you stop and you're invited to listen back. And I think what's great about the mobile phone that you can't do in the clinic is that what you're hearing back is actually your own voice. So you actually listen to yourself speaking, which we actually very rarely do. And you're listening to yourself speaking probably in a way that's very open and free and quite emotional. And people don't give themselves the opportunity to do that very often.
Like and then affirmation, it's a double affirmation when you listen back on yourself as well, isn't it?
It is a double affirmation. And what it also is, though, is a chance to take a fresh perspective, because you have an idea in your head of what you're saying and how you're sounding. And then when you hear yourself back, you can hear yourself in a very different way. So we then invite you to respond as the person that you were speaking to. And obviously you're responding as yourself, but you're reacting to yourself as you hear yourself and imagining that you are the illness or the person or whoever it is that you've put in the chair, the part of yourself, and you respond. And the therapeutic work around that is about seeing things from a different view. So hearing yourself in a different way, responding in a different way, which can then allow you to understand the problem within your relationship or yourself that you've been struggling with in a different way. And at the end of the exercise, we offer always an opportunity to reflect and to make some notes and to take a moment to think about how you feel, and then you move on with your life. And if that is obviously, if that causes a huge amount of distress and you feel you need to talk to someone quite urgently, then we have referrals to websites and the Samaritans and so on that every kind of wellbeing website would have. But we would also invite you to go and do the exercise again, or maybe do another exercise so that you can think it through again and have another perspective and another go, or just come back to it another day. And you can always look back over your past work. So you can revisit stuff and have another look, or then do it again and think again. And that's really the core of it. The next phase that we'll move into will be slightly more curated. So our idea is that we will invite people to do a specific exercise over a couple of weeks. So, 5 times each week for a couple of weeks. And then at the end of that, our aim is to offer them, if they want it, a 10-minute really focused session with a therapist where they'll talk through the work they've done in the couple of weeks and get some direction going forward. And then they'll move on again to do another 2 weeks of different exercises. So the idea behind that is that's for people who really do want something that is more classically therapeutic and more intense. And the idea about it is it's much more accessible. You do it for a short amount of time every day, and then you have this very intense period of intervention. So it will be much more doable and much more reasonably priced than any kind of therapy you would offer. We don't pitch this as a replacement therapy, but it uses therapeutic processes and allows you to bring them into your daily life. So that's really the fundamentals of it.
Things that come to mind when you talk about that for me, which is that having that 10 minutes actually with a good therapist can be really powerful if you've already done some of that unraveling and things have emerged, because I think when you're more open, aren't you, and accepting of things, that 10 minutes can be very powerful, can't it? But also I think then it allows you to think, I can actually use that fairly regularly if it's not cost prohibitive. Because I think one of the things that I think is so powerful about what you're doing is this cost issue, because therapy for a lot of people seems out of their reach. For me, I think that's a really important issue about this democratizing it, and the fact that you're going to have a very flexible approach, to things that you can do on screen, things that you possibly can have short, sharp therapy. And I imagine over time, if people need more, you'll probably provide links and other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And another piece around, which is also about democratizing and also giving people agency, is setting up group work. So, and those would obviously be mediated by professionals to start with. But the idea is that people will set up their own kind of rooms online, which exist more and more now, where they can talk about specific issues, or they can meet with a virtual support network. So there'll be all sorts of ways for people to create their own support network through the Shrink platform, and also to spread the word and to bring other people into their support group and build them in that way, so that you're actually saying to people, you can manage your own well-being and health and support network as well, and we'll give you the tools to do that with the help then that you need as and when you need it. And we do, and there'll obviously always be people who want to go on and have the full therapy experience, which we think is great and should be available to everybody that wants it. So this is more about getting to know yourself, having a daily kind of check-in. And our view is that if you can have a daily check-in to your well-being, then you can avert a lot of crises, because you start to get to know yourself really a lot better. We have a very simple mood monitor tool as well on the app, so you can go in every day, and it has like a color coding system, and you can look back over the calendar and see which days you tend to be red days and which days tend to be green days, and then you can start to kind of look at it and think, okay, what are the patterns here? What is it about a Tuesday that means I'm quite frequently down? Is it related to my hormones? Is it related to somebody I'm seeing? Is it, what is it about? So you can start to identify the patterns yourself and think more about what that means about your mood.
Brilliant idea, isn't it?
Because, and it's very simple.
Yeah, so sort of begin to self-analyze to some degree. Yeah.
Which is what in the end, what the work of therapy is, with the help of an expert who helps you in that journey. And a lot of the work, as you said at the beginning, actually happens outside of the room anyway. So it's great to have this tool with you if you feel like checking in as and when you want to, really. And I think the question of money is really important, obviously, but there are more issues around therapy. And I think particularly when we look at different groups, obviously we're women talking, and we tend to be more amenable to psychotherapy, but actually the highest suicide rate, for example, is amongst men. And men find it very difficult to talk about their mental health problems. So if you look at stats, you'll see that women are much more likely to suggest that they have a mental health problem, but men are much more likely to commit suicide. So we're very interested in getting access to those groups as well, who are much less likely to go into a traditional therapeutic setting. And there's been some research that's shown that men, for example, really like the anonymity of online support and are much more likely to engage with it in an online environment rather than having to turn up, in a physical setting every week. They find it much easier to disclose and to do the work they need to do. So that's also really exciting and interesting for us as well.
And I think, I imagine also for young people, I know that some young people are open to therapy, and perhaps more so now because there's a lot of work being done, young royals as well on this, being an understanding of mental health and its place in the world. But I also think for young people, it's hard, they can't afford therapy. And some of them perhaps being, they're so used to working now, probably much more acceptable and accessible for them. So I think that's great as well, as you say, for all generations, actually. It's going to be a fabulous tool.
Yes. And I think people, I think also there is a slight, it's not a backlash, because things like Instagram and Facebook and whatever, all the apps that young people are using are fantastic, but they are always about your best self. And I think what we wanted to, in fact, one of the very first conversations we had about Shrink was about somewhere for people to go with their real self, and where they could engage with their real self and really kind of do important work around understanding that real self rather than this kind of perfect self. And I think young people really get that. I think they really understand the pressures of your best self always being visible online. And I think they're much more interested in the reality of things and being and investigating things in that way. So we hope that this could be of real interest to the younger demographic as well. Yes,
definitely. And do you think over time, Claire, you would also sort of almost not promote, but I was talking, we were talking just then around equine therapy, which is extremely powerful, which I'm trained in, and I know you work with Andreas on. Do you see yourself almost perhaps educating people also in these other areas of therapy? Because there are, there's such a breadth of therapy now that's available to people, and in a way, some therapies will work better than others for people. Do you see that as perhaps stage 3 or 4, that that education piece would come in?
Yeah, I mean, Andreas and I are academics, right? So he's a professor and I've done a PhD, and I lifelong education and understanding both at an intellectual and psychological level are really fundamental to the ethos of the work that we do. So our ambition is that there will always be a part of Shrink that is free, so that people can come on and do the work they need to do free. But we also are very interested in this idea as a fundamental part of it, as something that we'd like to call the Shrink Academy, which will be all about education and understanding, what psychology is all about and what therapy is all about, and also working with psychotherapists so that we would have Shrink Academy psychotherapists working in all sorts of different areas of psychotherapy, who we would then work with and make available for people to use over the platform. And we've started that so we already have quite a lot of blog content that we make available through various platforms, and we try to make that content knowledge based, really. So it's not just promotion, it's about helping people understand what it is we're about and what therapy is really about. So we've done stuff about grief, about remembrance, about people's reactions, about re-emergence, post-COVID, about what that means for people, how it's not just about going to the pub, it's about people actually coming to terms with moving outside again. And a lot of people have a very ambivalent reaction to that, actually. So I suppose the approach to our blog post is always to kind of dig beneath the surface and offer something psychologically of value to readers. And I think that would kind of develop into the whole Shrink Academy approach as well. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I think, as you say, there's some of those themes that you're talking about in your 3 pillars, presumably also, because some of the things that we've found for women, as you get older, is sometimes isolation. There's a lot of anxiety. Yeah. Can I afford, to care for myself as I get older? If I'm a single woman, what's my sense of purpose now and place in the world? What's next for me? What's the next 40 years? And, mentally, physically, emotionally, am I strong enough to sustain that? So I think there's some really interesting opportunities here, aren't there, to support women, particularly, as you said, men, particularly in the sense of coming on the app, but also for women. I think there's some very specific themes that we're all dealing with that will be really helpful, won't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, women of all different ages have different stresses and strains, and obviously everybody is unique, but there are a lot of themes that emerge. So for women of my age, for example, it's about, as you say, what is the next phase? Children, if you have children, they're possibly leaving home, they don't need you so much anymore. You kind of become more invisible because you're not young anymore, or you're not as young. I mean, I still feel the same as I did when I was 25, but I realize I don't look the same anymore. So there's all of those kind of complicated issues around, what am I for? What's my purpose? So I think that absolutely, and that's where I feel so ambitious for the whole group piece of Shrink, enabling people to come together and explore those issues. I think group therapy is a fantastic thing. And the more people do it, I think the more they understand the power of it. And I think people see it play out in, other organizations use it. So Alcoholics Anonymous, for example, is built entirely around that kind of group therapy model. And it's, it's fantastic at the way it empowers people and builds their relationships and also their understanding and self-awareness and so on. So that's a fantastic model to bring and use more broadly in talking about other issues. Yeah.
I think group therapy is extraordinary. I've been working recently with Gordon Moody, who works with alcoholism addiction, and in extraordinary results with the group therapy. So I agree with you. It'd be wonderful to start the app individually and to be able to build those group is so powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really powerful, and something that we're definitely keen to push ahead on. Yeah.
Brilliant, Claire. It's been wonderful hearing about Shrink, because I think it's going to have such an important place in the world.
Thank you.
tell me, people can sign up, get the app, and it's free at the moment.
It is free, and there'll always be a bit that's free. Yeah.
And is there a website as well?
There is. It's called, for some reason, you have to, if you look for the Shrink app, you'll find it. You'll find the website, which has all our blog content on it and so on, and a little bit about myself and Andreas and the story of Shrink. And then, but most of our interaction tends to be through the app, but you'll find it all on the website as well. Yeah.
Perfect. And we're also going to put a link to a little video that shows you how it works, which I think will be brilliant. I think over time it'd be lovely to have you back again, Claire, and hear how it's going. But thank you. Really, really been delightful to talk to you.
No, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation today. And if you'd like to listen to more conversations with inspiring women, do look at our website, rockmyage.com, or register to have them delivered direct to your inbox. Until next time.